Albania is one of the smallest countries in Europe. It sits tucked against the Adriatic, hemmed in by mountains, overlooked by most history textbooks, and yet when geneticists map the paternal lineages of the Balkans, something immediately stands out. Albanians don't cluster with their neighbors. Not with Serbs, not with Macedonians, not with Bulgarians, not with any of the peoples who have shared borders, mountains, and centuries of contested territory with them. On a genetic chart, Albanians look like they came from somewhere else entirely. But that framing gets it exactly backwards. Albanians didn't come from somewhere else. Everyone else moved, and the ancient DNA is now precise enough to tell us when, how, and why Albania became the last place in the Balkans where a 3,000-year-old genetic world survived intact. In this video, we're going to walk through what the science actually found. We'll cover the geography that made survival possible, the language that has no living relative, the haplogroups that trace directly to the Bronze Age, the Slavic migration that rewrote every surrounding population, the landmark 2023 study that used the phrase genetic refugium to describe medieval Albania, and the Ottoman paradox that left 5 centuries of cultural transformation and almost no genetic trace at all. By the end, you'll see why Albanians aren't the anomaly on the map. They're the original. To understand why Albanian genetics look the way they do, you have to start with the land. Not as a backdrop, as a mechanism. Albania is a small country, roughly the size of Maryland, wedged between the Adriatic coast to the west and a wall of mountains to the east and north. The Albanian Alps in the north, the Korab Range along the eastern border, the Pindus chain running south. These aren't gentle hills. They are serious, isolating terrain. Deep valleys, narrow passes, settlements that for centuries were reachable only on foot. That geography did something specific. It created pockets of population that were extraordinarily difficult to penetrate, not just militarily, but demographically. Armies could pass through Albania. Empires could claim it on a map, but actually settling it, interbreeding with its populations at scale, absorbing it genetically the way migrations tend to absorb open plains populations, that was a different problem entirely. Compare that to the rest of the Balkans, the Morava Valley in Serbia, the Danube Corridor, the Thracian Plain in Bulgaria. These are open, accessible routes. When the Slavic migrations swept down from the northeast in the 5th and 6th centuries, those corridors funneled incoming populations directly into contact with existing ones. The mixing was inevitable. The genetic transformation was rapid. Albania's interior didn't offer those corridors. It offered walls, and behind those walls, something ancient was still running. There is a detail about the Albanian language that stops linguists cold the first time they fully reckon with it. Albanian is not a dialect of anything. It is not closely related to Greek, to Latin, to the Slavic languages, to any living branch of the Indo-European family. It is its own branch, the sole surviving member of a lineage that split off from the rest of Indo-European so long ago, and in such isolation that nothing else made it through. Every other language that was once spoken in the Western Balkans, the Illyrian tongues, the Thracian dialects, whatever Paleo-Balkan languages filled this region before Greek and Latin arrived, is extinct. Albanian is the only one still running. That is not a minor footnote. That is a signal. Language and genetics don't always travel together. A population can be conquered, culturally absorbed, and linguistically replaced without its biology changing much. But the reverse pattern, where a language survives while everything around it is replaced, tends to mean something specific. It tends to mean the population carrying that language didn't move, didn't get absorbed, and didn't get replaced either. Albanian also preserves this in its vocabulary. The oldest layer of Albanian words, the pre-Latin stratum, contains terms for mountain, forest, livestock, and agricultural life that have no traceable origin in any neighboring language family. They are inherited from something older, something that was already here. The genome and the language are pointing at the same thing. A population that stayed when the world around it changed. When geneticists run the numbers on modern Albanian paternal lineages, 3 haplogroups dominate the picture: EV13, R1b, and J2BL2283. All 3 are found across the Balkans in ancient samples. All 3 predate Rome. All 3 predate the Slavic migrations. And all 3 trace continuously from the Bronze Age and Iron Age populations in the Western Balkans. That alone would make Albania interesting. But one of those 3 makes it genuinely singular. J2BL283 is, for practical purposes, an Albanian haplogroup. It exists elsewhere, but nowhere else at the frequency or depth that it exists in Albania. During the Bronze Age and Iron Age, it accounted for roughly 50 to 70% of all male lineages in ancient Western Balkan populations, in sites archaeologically connected to Illyrian cultural expressions. Today, the oldest J2BL283 sample recovered from Albanian territory dates to approximately the 19th century before the Common Era, from a site in northern Albania. Modern northern Albanians carrying this haplogroup are estimated to be around 50 to 60 generations distant from Bronze Age Dalmatian individuals who carried the same marker. Read that again. 50 to 60 generations, unbroken, in a region that has been invaded, conquered, and resettled repeatedly for 3 millennia. That is not proximity to the ancient world. That is continuity with it. And J2BL283 didn't stay confined to the Balkans. Ancient DNA carrying this marker has been recovered from southern Italy, from regions where the Messapians settled, a people who crossed the Adriatic from Illyrian territory centuries before Rome unified the peninsula. The Albanian genetic signal was already traveling before the migrations that would later try to erase it ever began. In the 5th and 6th centuries CE, the Roman Empire was collapsing in the west and contracting in the east. The administrative structures that had held the Balkans together for centuries were fracturing. And into that fracture, from the northeast, came one of the most consequential demographic events in European history. Slavic-speaking populations expanded across the Balkans with a speed and scale that permanently altered the genetic map of the region. This was not simply a military conquest. Armies conquer and leave. What happened here was a settlement. Slavic communities moved into the river valleys, the plains, the accessible lowlands of modern Serbia, Bulgaria, Croatia, and North Macedonia. They did not just displace the existing populations. They intermixed with them at such a scale that the genetic profile of those populations was substantially transformed within a few centuries. The evidence is in the haplogroups. The Y chromosome haplogroup I2A, the dominant paternal marker across the South Slavic world today, was not present in the Balkans during the Bronze Age. It arrived with the Slavic migrations. It stayed. And today it defines the paternal landscape of Croats, Serbs, Bulgarians, and Macedonians. That transformation was thorough. It was also remarkably uniform across every Balkan population that had open geographic access to the migration routes. Every population except one. In Albania, the Slavic wave broke against the mountains and lost momentum. Slavic admixture did eventually enter the Albanian gene pool. Studies estimate somewhere between 18 to 48% in modern Albanians, but crucially, the research shows this admixture was predominantly female-mediated. Slavic women married into Albanian communities. The Albanian paternal lines held. The wall worked. In 2023, a landmark genomic study analyzed over 6,000 ancient West Eurasian genomes alongside 74 newly sequenced modern Albanians. It was one of the most comprehensive genetic transects ever conducted on the Western Balkans. And when the researchers looked at medieval Albanian remains, they used a specific phrase to describe what they found: genetic refugium. A refugium, in biology, is a location where a population survives through a period of widespread change that eliminates or transforms the same population everywhere else. The term is usually applied to plant and animal species sheltering through ice ages in pockets of stable climate. The 2023 study applied it to a human population, to Albanians, specifically to the medieval Albanian interior, where Bronze Age ancestry had been running measurably and continuously for over 3,000 years, while every surrounding Balkan population was being genetically rebuilt. What the ancient DNA from medieval Albanian sites showed was a pattern distinct from neighboring Balkan regions: minimal Slavic genetic contribution on the paternal side, high continuity with pre-migration Bronze Age ancestry, a population that had, in the researchers' own framing, sheltered its ancient inheritance through the migration wave that transformed everyone around it. The study also found that present-day Albanians predominantly descend from early medieval inhabitants already present in Albanian territory as early as 800 to 900 CE, more than 2 centuries before Albanians appear in any written historical source. That last detail matters enormously. For centuries, the silence of the historical record was used as evidence that Albanians were late arrivals, migrants who had filtered into the Balkans after the Slavic wave, and were not, as Albanian tradition held, the descendants of the ancient Illyrians. The genome closed that argument. The silence wasn't absent. The people were there. The record simply wasn't written down. 1480, the Ottoman Empire consolidated control over Albanian territory. What followed was 5 centuries of rule that reshaped Albanian civilization more thoroughly than almost any other force in its history. The transformation was visible and total. Ottoman architecture rose across Albanian cities. The Albanian lexicon absorbed hundreds of Arabic and Turkish loanwords that remain embedded in everyday speech today. Roughly 70% of the Albanian population converted to Islam, a shift that reorganized social structures, legal frameworks, family naming conventions, and daily religious practice across generations. Albanians rose to extraordinary prominence within the empire itself. The Koprulu dynasty, which effectively governed the Ottoman state through much of the 17th century, was Albanian in origin. Grand viziers, military commanders, administrators. Albanian hands were deeply involved in running the most powerful empire of the era. 5 centuries. Total administrative grip. Profound cultural imprint. The kind of sustained contact that, historically, tends to leave a clear genetic signal. It left almost none. Every current genetic analysis of the Albanian population finds Turkish and Central Asian ancestry at levels that barely register. The Ottoman Empire converted Albanian religion, restructured Albanian society, saturated Albanian language and architecture and cuisine, and produced from Albanian ranks some of its most powerful figures. Genetically, it passed through Albania like weather passes through stone. This is not unique to Albania. The Moorish presence in Portugal lasted centuries and left a similarly faint genetic trace, despite enormous cultural impact. But the Albanian case makes the paradox unusually sharp. Culture moves faster than DNA. Empires can rewrite a civilization's daily life completely, while leaving the underlying biology almost untouched. The Ottoman chapter in Albanian history is the most striking proof of that principle anywhere in the Balkans. For over a century, the question of Albanian origins sat unresolved in a space between history, archaeology, and competing political narratives. Albanian tradition held that Albanians were the descendants of the ancient Illyrians, the Bronze Age and Iron Age peoples who dominated the Western Balkans before Greek colonization and Roman conquest. Critics argued that the historical record offered no continuous thread, no written Albanian sources before the 15th century, no unbroken documented lineage connecting medieval Albanians to ancient Illyrian populations. The silence, they argued, was evidence of discontinuity. The ancient DNA doesn't leave much room for that argument anymore. What the genomic evidence establishes is precise. Albanians are not a population that arrived in the Balkans after the Slavic migrations. They are a population that was already there, carrying Bronze Age Western Balkan ancestry continuously, sheltering it through Rome, through Byzantium, through the Slavic wave, through 5 centuries of Ottoman rule. The 3 haplogroups most characteristic of modern Albanians, EV13, R1b, and J2BL283, all trace directly to ancient Balkan populations predating every major migration event of the historical period. Here is the reframing the science demands. Albanians don't appear anomalous on a genetic chart because they are unusual. They appear anomalous because they are the baseline. They represent what the Western Balkans looked like genetically before the Slavic migrations transformed every surrounding population. Everyone else diverged. Albania held. The 2023 study also found medieval Albanian populations showing genetic links as far north as Pannonia, modern Hungary. Not because Albanians were expanding northward, but because the last remnants of the Bronze Age Balkan genetic world, shrinking under Slavic pressure from every direction, were converging on the places that still preserved it. Albania wasn't just sheltering one population. It was the last address of an entire ancient genetic world. The Illyrian continuity question is not fully closed. Genetics establishes population continuity, not ethnic or cultural identity in the precise historical sense. But the claim that Albanians are latecomers, migrants, or newcomers to the Balkans is now extraordinarily difficult to sustain against the genomic record. Here is what science actually tells us about the genetic origin of the Albanian people. Albanians carry Bronze Age and Iron Age Western Balkan ancestry that has been running continuously for over 3,000 years. Their signature haplogroups predate Rome, predate Byzantium, predate every migration event that transformed the surrounding region. The Slavic wave that genetically rebuilt Serbia, Bulgaria, Croatia, and North Macedonia broke against the Albanian mountains and left the paternal lineages largely intact. 5 centuries of Ottoman rule rewrote Albanian culture, language, religion, and architecture while leaving almost no trace in the genome. And the 2023 landmark study confirmed what Albanian tradition had long held, and the historical record had long obscured. These people were here. They were always here. The Albanian case is one of the most remarkable findings in the ancient DNA literature, precisely because it inverts the expected story. In a region defined by conquest, migration, and demographic transformation, one population simply stayed. And because everyone around it changed, it now looks like the outlier, when the truth is the opposite. Albanians are not an anomaly. They are the archive. The last surviving record of what the Bronze Age Balkans looked like before history, as most people understand it, began rewriting the map. If this story gave you something, a like helps this channel reach more people who care about the deeper history that only becomes visible through ancient DNA. Subscribe if you want more. And if you carry Albanian roots, or roots anywhere along the ancient Illyrian Adriatic, part of what the genome preserved is yours. What part of the world are you in? Drop a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe.